Germany's apology to Namibia comes one day after French President Emmanuel Macron admitted France could have done more to prevent the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. Now, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also apologized this week over the internment of Italian Canadians during World War II. I'm joined now by William Lawrence, who's a professor of political science and international affairs at American University here in Washington. Professor, admissions and apologies this week from France, from Germany, from Canada. Why now? What took so long?
Well, with the increasing relationships, economic relationships and other relationships between these Western and European countries and African countries, the demands for apologies and reparation grow year on year, but they're never enough. Germany actually officially recognized the genocide 6 years ago, but couldn't pay reparations. Now they've agreed to pay reparations to a country that is already their top recipient of assistance in Africa. And the groups that were directly affected by the genocide are saying none of the money's destined for them, and they're not even agreeing to the reparations. And these are, therefore, thorny relationships, and the European powers rarely get it right. And I suspect there'll be more apologies and more reparations later in at least the French and the German cases.
Germany says it's setting up this fund as a gesture of recognition of the immeasurable suffering that it caused. But again, I mean, can you give us how something like this would even work? I mean, do you have to go find the victims' families? Do you have to set up some kind of account? Does the government get involved? I mean, how does something like this work? And you mentioned some of them are saying, we're not interested in all of this.
Well, they wiped out 80% of one ethnic group, 50% of another ethnic group, and didn't even name the third ethnic group that they attacked. And then none of this is destined for those families. Now, the groups themselves said, look, we're not interested in individual reimbursement for the descendants of the victims of the genocide, which was the first genocide of the 20th century, and in which the Germans practiced a lot of the horrible techniques they practiced right through the Holocaust and World War II. And they're saying, how about a collective recompense for our region, which the government of Namibia hasn't even offered them yet. Now, this will be paid over 30 years, so a lot of it could be renegotiated. But the fact that the groups that were actually affected by this genocide are saying this is not good enough and the German president isn't even welcome in our area of Namibia means there's more to do.
Let me move on to French President Emmanuel Macron. He didn't necessarily apologize, but he asked for forgiveness for his country's role in not doing enough with the Rwanda genocide. How do you think that's playing out there in Rwanda?
Well, I think it's playing out not that well in Rwanda and not that well in Algeria and not that well in other places that were victimized by the French colonial atrocities. Look at the successive Macron apologies for Algeria, which are never enough. And the Algerians just started celebrating a national day for the biggest massacre of 45,000 Algerians in a couple of weeks in 1945 that the French have never really admitted full responsibility for. And so that's what strikes the people who follow French African politics, that they're not even doing enough for their largest massacres. And then they're talking about Rwanda, where they could have done more, but they weren't even really responsible for the genocide. It's simply that they didn't act fast enough. And of course, don't forget, this was what Bill Clinton considered his big failure. It's the reason why Samantha Powers was so important in the Obama administration. And then Samantha Powers fell on the job when she tried to apply these principles to Syria. And so we have, as I'm saying, successive failures, failure after failure, insufficient apology after insufficient apology, misdirected reparations after misdirected reparations, and countries have to do a lot better at actually directing aid and apologies to the actual descendants of the victims of these atrocities, which were just massive. We're talking about millions of Africans over the 20th century that still haven't seen full compensation for what they were put through.
Professor, quickly, do you think all these admissions and apologies, regardless of how insufficient they are, do you think this could eventually perhaps push Turkey to accept the genocide of Armenians during the Ottoman Empire?
Well, it's all part of the same global conversation about genocide. I think what's going on in Turkey these days is they're increasingly, like the French and the Germans in this case, admitting the atrocities and the violence without, well, objecting to the term genocide and certain framings. That's part of an evolution in Turkey. I've been involved in a number of discussions involving Turks and Armenians over the last year or so, and you can see an evolution in the Turkish discourse without admitting enough. So in that sense, it's parallel, and these wounds and traumas of history we're seeing take not only decades, but even centuries sometimes to fully come to terms with. One good thing about all these apologies, let me add though, is we can start revising curriculums and teach these things in schools, and that prepares the next generation not to repeat history.